Now, it's widely expected that the Scottish Cabinet will discuss what it wants to do about same-sex marriage. This morning, Cardinal Keith O'Brien made it clear he wants to see a referendum on the issue, a call swiftly rejected by most of his opponents on the subject. Both sides have become used to extravagant language, and large generalisations have been flying as brutally as personally offensive remarks. In a moment, we'll discuss what this debate says about the state of society. First, Jamie McIver brings us up to date.
It was Gay Pride in Glasgow on Saturday. These days, it's more like a carnival than a campaigning rally. The biggest battles gay men and lesbians fought for equality have been won. An equal age of consent, the abolition of Section 28, and perhaps most crucially, downright homophobia and straightforward prejudice is often now considered beyond the pale. But gay rights campaigners insist there's still more to be done, and same-sex marriage is the current battleground.
When the Equal Marriage campaign came out initially, I was really not either for it or against it. But what now has promoted me to back it is the campaign against it. So when I was suddenly being referred to as a dog in a field or no better than a bestiality and this sort of thing, that's then when I started to support the campaign.
Civil partnerships give same-sex couples the same legal rights as a married heterosexual couple. Indeed, some people casually refer to civil partnerships as gay weddings, but in law, they're not weddings.
A civil ceremony is not the same thing as a marriage. It's not. It doesn't have the same respect or the same rights.
The government insists no church will have to conduct same-sex weddings, but this has failed to calm real anxieties, especially in the Roman Catholic Church. One fear is that one day they could be forced to hold gay weddings.
I think we've seen that some very radical equality lobby groups have been pushing the political agenda for quite some time, and they have definitely skewed the balance of public debate on this. I think it's time to redress that. It's time to have a balanced discussion and debate about it, that we can do that reasonably. And I think when we do that, they will see that we have to keep marriage defined as between a man and a woman.
Amongst the faithful at Mass today were a variety of views.
The same-sex marriage I'm against, very much so, because the Catholic Church says that we shouldn't.
I feel that the civil partnerships, people have all legal rights that they want, financial rights, and I think my personal belief is that marriage is a union between one man and one woman.
Devout Catholics and gay rights activists are both but a part of Scotland's diverse society. And according to the Scottish Social Attitudes Survey, downright hostility to gay marriage is a minority view. When people were asked if same-sex couples should have the right to marry, 60% agreed and just 19% disagreed, though some other polls haven't given such a decisive result.
We hope the Scottish Government will join progressive governments around the world who are increasingly legalising same-sex marriage. You know, the majority of the public support this, the majority of politicians at the Scottish Parliament support this.
The modern SNP sees itself as a progressive social democratic party, but in gay weddings, its members don't all speak with one voice. Former leader Gordon Wilson is a staunch opponent, and at the SNP conference last year, a small minority of the views at a fringe debate demonstrated the conviction of some critics.
I believe that whether our nation goes forward to independence under the SNP will depend what the SNP does with this. Whether we continue to be blessed by God and able to lead the nation, or whether God's blessing will fall from us if we allow homosexual marriage as opposed to partnership.
77,000 people responded to the government's consultation. Whatever decision it reaches, some will be upset. And that decision may well influence how some with strong views vote in the independence referendum.
Well, in Dundee now we have Professor John Haldane, Director of St Andrews University's Centre for Ethics, Philosophy and Public Affairs, And in Edinburgh, Richard Holloway, a writer, former Episcopalian Bishop of Edinburgh. Thanks to you both for coming in. John, this is obviously a very interesting area where law and morality can collide. So it might be interesting, useful to look at a legal principle of harm here. If a gay Christian couple wish to get married in a church, something supported by their particular church and faith, and yet are prevented from doing so by an existing law, which is then, in that reading, enshrining, formalising prejudice and discrimination, and so mitigating against a pluralistic approach to society, you can see the legal harm to those individuals and society as a whole. On the other hand, where is the harm actually to those churches and individuals who oppose gay marriage when there's no compulsion on them to conduct or condone these marriages?
Well, that's a complex question. Look, I think there is at least three ways in which you could look at this. One are a set of political issues, then there are legal issues, and then there are ethical, and perhaps there are also cultural issues. As far as the legal issues are concerned, my understanding is that there is an awareness that there is some complexity here, and that there may be a question as to whether or not there might have to be some change in equality legislation to protect those churches that do not want to conduct gay marriages and don't want to be exposed to legal action on that score. But that seems to me is a legal question, and I take it that what most people are interested in, it's a technical legal question if you like, I suppose what we would say is something like this, that we want the law to protect the interests, to the extent that this is possible, of all of the citizenry, and clearly here we have contest over a fairly central issue, and we have to try to find a way of, to the extent that it's possible, of allowing people space in which to express their views while also recognising the rights of others to do so.
But John, if there are conflicting interests, John, clearly as there are in this, and there is no element of compulsion on one party, but there is an element of denying something to another party, why is it not reasonable to say that in the best interest of society as a whole, we will not deny things to people, and equally we won't compel other people to do something they don't want to do?
Yeah, but look, precisely the question of compulsion is what's at issue here, and this is where I take it that there is this question as to whether or not under the current equalities legislation, whether in fact the rights of those who do not wish to conduct such marriages can in fact be protected against civil action. And
but if they could, would that satisfy you?
Well, I mean, I'm not so much interested. I think we're interested in a lot of larger questions about respect and so on, and I mean, the gay marriage issue, for my own part, I'm not at all opposed to, say, civil partnership. The point about marriage is that I don't think that marriage is a rights issue. I think it's a common good issue. Okay. It's about how society wants to regard itself. So it's a much larger question.
Richard, in some way, though, is it not tempting to frame this in a legal way? Because when you come out of a legal paradigm and you try to have a moral debate, it gets very ugly very quickly, does it not, Richard?
Yeah, but I think that's not surprising. I think big cultural shifts are always painful. And I think that what we're seeing at the moment in Scotland, and in fact in the whole of Britain, is a shift in a direction that's been resisted understandably by institutions that have a different understanding of what's right, legal and moral. Just think of the stooshy over giving women the franchise, for instance, giving women the vote. A lot of rather similar arguments were used against that, but institutions are very cumbersome creatures to change, and the ecology requires most of us to reverence them, to keep them stable and unchanging. But if you keep them too unchanging, then they don't adapt to new realities. And I think that what we're seeing here is the slow adapting of our culture politically to the status of gay people. I think the other thing I'd say is that on the whole, the state is very sensitive to religious opinions and convictions here. And religious institutions are already exempt from a lot of equalities legislation. They cannot be sued, for instance, for refusing to accept women priests or employ women in sacred professions like that. So I think that politicians are very well aware of the complexities here. And my hunch is, I may be wrong, But my hunch is that once the dust is settled and this is passed, in a few years' time, churches all round, the ones that oppose and the ones that favour it, will adjust, and they will find that the earth hasn't opened and swallowed them up. But we need to have these fierce debates in order to move things on.
John, you have written in the past that anything less than approbation actually becomes a target for legal action. In what regard do you think that that's likely?
Well, again, you're pressing the legal question, and that's a technical question, and lawyers will have to sort that out. I think probably what you're referring to is this. I've observed in the past that there has been a slide, I think, over the notion of toleration. So toleration essentially means putting up with that of which you do not approve. Whereas there is a tendency now to think, well, you're not tolerant unless you approve, and indeed even unless you celebrate. And I think it is precisely in a way for the reasons that Richard was touching on. In many ways, these are divisive issues, not the only ones. Debates about the economy, debates about military issues. There's a whole range of issues over which we debate in society. I think it's very important that we be able to find a way of tolerating the fact that there are people who disagree with us, and that's got to be true for all of us. This is a question of cultivating a kind of civility. But toleration, as I say, doesn't mean approving what others think or the way in which they live. It means living or adjusting to the fact that they do have these opinions, that they do choose to live in those ways, and so on. So I think I would hope that Richard probably agrees with this, actually, that toleration is a very important social virtue, but it's not a question of approbation or celebration. It's a question precisely of accepting as fellow citizens people with whom one doesn't agree.
Yes, I do in fact agree with that, and I find tolerance a kind of neutral word. I prefer words like magnanimity and generosity, the ability to let someone have a point of view that you passionately disagree with.
Yes.
And yet a bit of you is actually glad of that, because in the ecology of ideas, it's by passionate disagreement that we move on and even sometimes adjust our own thinking.
But also, this is open to subjective interpretations of what is a reasonable way to respond and what is a tolerant attitude, because obviously, you know, you're lining up on opposite sides of this argument, both arguing for tolerance here. But Richard, picking up on something John mentioned there about the sorts of things with which the church is interested now, I mean, we understand from theologians that there are 4 occasions when Jesus talks about sexual relations, and many, many occasions when he talks about money, usury, and justice. Our church is obsessed with private sexual autonomy.
Well, you could argue that. I mean, there's no doubt at all. It seems to get us in a real mess. I mean, my own church, the Anglican Church, has been endlessly debating this. It does other important things, but of course that's the issue the press is interested in. So to a certain extent you could say that public opinion zeroes in on these issues because the press is interested. We actually debate many, many other issues. But you're right, Jesus doesn't say a lot about sex in the New Testament at all. He's wanting generosity and forgiveness in relationships, and we all fail. And I think that most theologians today realize that we've moved on a lot in the way we affirm different sexualities, including the sexuality in marriage, because the church used to have a very grudging attitude to sex and marriage. The old prayer book service used to say that marriage was for people who couldn't be continent. They couldn't be celibate. Celibacy was the highest vocation, and you got married. It was a bit like being on a methadone maintenance program. If you couldn't do it without sex, you got a license for it. That's all changed, and now all the churches have a celebratory approach. So churches do move on and change, but slowly.
John, do you accept that Christian morality evolves?
No,
sorry, I was asking John there.
In some sense, obviously that is so. I mean, our understanding of things evolves and so on. But I mean, I think it's just 2 things very briefly. One is the idea that the churches are preoccupied with sex seems to me curious, because I would have thought it's the surrounding
culture. And John, the other one, I'm
culture.
sorry, we're literally out of time. The other idea is what, very briefly?
Well, just the importance of cultivating the value of civility.
Okay. Well, that's a good note to end on. Thank you
Now
both
we'd agree
very
with
much
that.
indeed. Thank you both so much. Thanks.